Hello, and welcome to the ATPE Podcast, brought to you by the Association of Texas Professional Educators and covering the hottest topics on Texas educators' minds today.
Welcome back, listeners, to another episode where we are celebrating the meaningful intersection between Jewish American Heritage Month and Teacher Appreciation Month. You'll remember in our last episode, we spoke with Elizabeth SoRelle, who is an educator with the Texas Genocide, Holocaust, and Antisemitism Advisory Commission. One of the services that they offer beyond vetting all of the educational resources in Texas is a speakers bureau. And one of the speakers, in addition to Elizabeth, that you can request is my special guest today, Claudia Loewenstein. Welcome, Claudia, and thank you for being here.
Oh, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. And so I'm just going to dig right in here and ask you just to introduce or tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to Holocaust education.
Perfect. So I spent 44 years in the classroom. I taught both middle school and high school. My subjects were French, German, and Spanish over that course of 44 years. And being from Latin America, I have a passion for salsa and mambo dancing. I carried that forth into my classes. We had a very popular club, the Eighth Grade Mamboleros. I'm also the daughter of Holocaust survivors, Werner Loewenstein, my father, and Gerda Schindler, my mother. And their families lived in Germany for generations. And so in our home, the Holocaust wasn't distant. It was very much told to us at the kitchen table. You know, we would hear the stories from our parents, from our grandparents, extended family. I spent 2 years doing archival research about my family's Holocaust story. And then I put a presentation together so that I could pass the stories I heard from my family members to our Texas students in the classroom.
Once an educator, always an educator, right?
Yeah, a true story.
One of the things you mentioned is how very open your family was in discussing their experience with the Holocaust. And that as an educator, you wanted to bring this into educational spaces. So, what was the real motivation?
Teaching the Holocaust is not just history, it's real lessons with real people. And it's really about humanity, how we treat each other. That's what the Holocaust story is about. And with rising anti-Semitism today, students need to hear these real stories. I know that stories change the way children see people if they're different, because if you tell them the stories, they develop empathy in a way, you know, a textbook really can't do that. So that's a huge motivator. Another thing that motivates me is that in that 45 minutes that I've spent with kids, the teachers themselves, coaches, principals come afterwards. And I just had that little one-on-one moment with them. I see by what they say, I see it in their eyes that they felt like, wow, this was worthwhile time spent in the classroom. I mean, that's everything. The notes from my students, maybe that's the most powerful, because I give the principals my address so that kids, if they want, can send me letters, notes, and I have saved every single one of those notes. Even talking about it, it makes me emotional. It's worth everything right there.
You mentioned you might be willing to share a little bit of your story and the story of your parents as a descendant of Holocaust survivors. Would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit of that with our listeners?
What I start with is my own father's story. What happened to him as a child growing up, ground zero, Germany, while the Nazis were rising into power. So it was a process of, you know, almost a decade. life became a frightening place for children. And the Holocaust did not begin in the death camps. So it began with laws, the Nuremberg laws. I tell the students about what that means. My father was 9, just as the Nuremberg laws began to unfold over the course of 8 years. The first thing that happened to everyone Jewish was they lost their citizenship. So they had no country. So at 9, he was no longer able to play in parks because Jewish children were not allowed to use the public parks anymore. By 10 and 11, he was not able to join sports. He was very athletic and loved sports, couldn't join sports clubs in Germany. By 12, he was expelled from school along with his Jewish teachers because Jewish children were no longer allowed to be in school. So this is the process of what it meant to grow up in ground zero. Then one night, everything changed. It happened in one night, and that was Kristallnacht, a night of broken glass, as it's called in English. Childhoods ended in Germany that very night. So what was it? It was the Nazi stormtroopers were given orders to ransack houses violently, to break the windows and smash all the Jewish businesses. And this is the entire country one night. It's called a pogrom when it's a planned attack. Children watched as their parents were dragged out onto the street. So it was a night of horror. Now, my family was very fortunate. They had a family friend. My grandfather's closest friend from a hang gliding club. He was a very much a daredevil, and he was a hang glider. And so he came to the house, Christian, and he came to the house and hid my father, mother, grandparents, and their grandparents, 5 members, for 2 nights and 2 days. And so they survived that night. My father and his parents were able to escape, and within 3 weeks to get out, a harrowing, narrow escape to Chile, halfway across the world. Unfortunately and tragically, my father's grandparents never made it out of Germany alive. They died in concentration camps. I like to show how my family that night was saved by someone kind and caring. One more example I'll give is a story I share with students, and they're very riveted on this particular topic. It's the Kinder transport. It was a humanitarian effort that saved 10,000 children, unaccompanied children. So churches, Christians, Quakers, politicians, synagogues in England said, okay, we can't save the adults. They knew because this was right after Kristallnacht. It was the harbinger of the Holocaust. They put themselves together and got 10,000 children out, a generation. Now, 80% of those children were orphaned because the parents didn't get out. And one of my cousins is one of those kids. So I show the students the pictures of my cousin. He's got out to England. His family did not make it out of Germany. But those are the kind of, in the depths of darkness, even still people were kind enough to step in, save so many children's lives, including my cousins. I've heard the word upstanders, and so much of that I tell in my stories of upstanding when you do the right thing at the right moment.
I don't know if you would feel comfortable, Claudia, but would you perhaps share some of those photos with me to put online in our professional learning course?
I think that's a great idea, and I will do that.
I'd love to honor your family in that way by just reminding people that these are humans, they were survivors. When we think about what you've already touched on, I'd say, why would you encourage classrooms and campuses to invite a speaker? Why is it important at this point in time?
Yeah, it's very true. At this point in time is great. A speaker will make history real. And, research shows, I know I'm not going to say anything new to the teachers listening, but research shows that when students' learning is tied into a personal story, they're going to retain more. And so it's very impactful. And I hope you open the door for the kids to really think about questions they may never have thought of. So if a teacher said, hey, read chapter 16 on the kinder transport, they'll do their assignment. But the questions may not be the same as if they see me showing a picture of my 15-year-old cousin, a picture of the transport. And so that's a deeper level of thinking. And I was just going to say, and ultimately, really, it helps teachers when you have the speakers teach very difficult to teach subjects.
So I want to know, when it comes to a speaker, what ages are appropriate? Would you share that kinder transport story beginning at what grade? And
The way I've developed the presentations, it's really 8 through 12. I haven't ever taught younger kids, but there are speakers that do. So, that's the beauty of having the Holocaust Speakers Bureau with the commission. They have a match for everyone.
I think that's what Elizabeth reiterated as well, is that the resources and speakers provide an age appropriate curriculum. They're not
Yeah.
talking about the specific Holocaust prior to probably about eighth grade, that with those younger students, we're talking more about those messages around being an upstander and just exposing them to Jewish culture rather than Holocaust.
I've been now in these past 2 years in urban and suburban and rural schools. I've had an opportunity to see all those kids. I would just say I was stunned and it was unexpected for me, the level of interest and fascination with the topic of the Holocaust. That I did not expect. One of the students came and said, my grandmother's friend was on the kinder transport. And she was just amazed because of the pictures and all that. I was surprised by the depth of some of the questions that kids will ask. How did your parents keep going on after this, after they hear their story? I mean, that's a big question. And that opens up such a great conversation to the resilience of human spirit.
That's wonderful. And I think when you share that and discuss the connection that those students have, like you said, in a rural area, maybe you're the only other person who's talked about that with them, right? Like they've heard about it, but they haven't connected with anybody else.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
maybe their classmates, it's an entree to them sharing their Jewish culture or some heritage that maybe they didn't feel comfortable sharing before. I love that that provides a connection and an opportunity and the real world application, right? That you talk about, of like, these are real stories, real people, real humans, and something that really happened. It's not just something you're reading about in a book. Like you said, brings it to life. You said the students in your experience have been so respectful in sharing your story.
Mhm.
And I'm sure in some part that is due to the educators preparing them. So I know my educator brain is automatically going to, what is best practice in setting these students up, or what
Yes.
considerations would our educators out there need to think about?
So I do have some thoughts on that, especially now that I've done this a little bit. Hmm. I mean, the first thing is, of course, to set the tone that this is a human story, not just a history lesson. So the speaker coming in is probably talking about their parent. If it's a descendant, is talking about their parents, is talking about their grandparents. It's a very personal story. So that's setting the tone, and explaining that is a very big piece. Giving a little context, depending on what grade you are, depending on when you bring in the speaker. I understand you can't always provide a context. You don't need to overdo the context part. Speaker will bring it to life. They'll bring the evidence, the story, and then the teacher can come back around. Post conversations are very valuable. One thing I've learned that I'd like to tell everybody, if you're going through the Speakers Bureau, which is the best way to go, of course, they will have a little biography about us. So if the teacher requests a little bio, then the teacher can read that And really, that sets the tone and the platform and the scene. So I highly recommend, if at all possible, to get that uh, beforehand. And some people do it and some people don't. That's why I'm saying that to all teachers listening. It's just helpful. The reflection questions are really important. Be, once a teacher, always a teacher. You know how that is. I have a little sheet ready and prep for teachers if they should like to use those as jump off points for discussions.
And I think those are all good things that you mentioned, right? The ability to request from the Speakers Bureau a bio and a photo, setting it up. This is a human, setting the tone, reminding them of the expectations and the serious nature of this conversation when it's specific to the Holocaust in grades 8 through 12. And then also possibly thinking, depending on where you are and the curriculum or educational components that tie into this, thinking about having the students develop some questions. And those questions might change after listening to your story. I'm sure there's things they couldn't have anticipated that they're going to be intrigued about. And so I know sometimes we're very surprised by some of those challenging topics, but I'm sure it makes for good conversation and opens up that opportunity. I'm just curious personally if there's any difference in venues, those speaking engagements in terms of, is it always like within a school day and students only?
It's something I didn't think of for this conversation, but it's actually a fantastic question. Every school district has different spaces. The venue is actually really important when you have a Holocaust speaker because a principal said, okay, well, we'll put you in the gym. And I said, I don't think that's going to be effective. The space is too large. You have to be closer because the topic needs a closeness with the audience. And so then she put me in the perfect space. She put me in one of those rooms where you have a divider in the room and it can be opened. And it was perfect. She had her tech crew. We worked together and the space was ideal. So more you can allow for a smaller space, the better your interaction will be, which will make it for a more successful experience.
I can't imagine that type of topic being broached in a gym. I know sometimes that's the only place a campus has that really holds a decent amount of people. Something that I thought was really powerful was something that you shared with me prior to this conversation, which is that you may be the first Jewish person that a student meets, or even an adult or educator in the room meets, or everybody in the room meets, because Texas is so expansive. Like you said, you're going from suburban, urban, rural, you're all over the place. And so how do you hold that responsibility? I mean, that's a huge responsibility, right?
So I think, you're approaching kind of the heart of the matter here. Uh, and the word responsibility is exactly what I feel. I feel the responsibility to be able to convey this well. I understand that I may be their first voice. That's a Jewish voice. I understand that. And so I just try to be human and connect directly. Maybe a few jokes, whatever. I'm almost definitely a first descendant of a Holocaust survivor that they will encounter. So I want them to understand that Jewish life did not end with the Holocaust. Jewish life is separate from the Holocaust. It is a part of it, of course, but you know, there's a continuum, families in everyday life, schools, athletic events. The Jewish continuity is just part of the norm. After 45 minutes spent together in a room, my hope is that they will leave that classroom with more than facts. They have a face, they've gotten to know my family, they have a little more Jewish cultural insights, including the fact that Jewish grandmothers, they know how to salsa dance,
I think that it frequently we only hear about Jewish identity, culture, history in connection with the Holocaust.
Right.
So I believe it's so important, and even more important maybe, for them to know that there's this culture, this identity, and people of that are more than that, right? That there is that continuity. And like you said, that a Jewish a Jewish grandma can salsa dance.
Not all, but some.
I've enjoyed our conversation here so much today, Claudia, and I appreciate you speaking about this and letting our educators across the state know that this opportunity exists. I think there are many out there that don't know that this exists. I want to remind them that this is a service and it's free of charge. And that there is an opportunity to request a speaker on the website, which I will point out and provide a link to so that they can go there directly. And I appreciate all the considerations and what you shared about your personal family and their story. And so I just want to give you an opportunity if there is any other thoughts that you want to leave our educators with.
I think that bringing in the speakers will be only for the better. I haven't heard yet of any time when it wasn't really well received by students. I'm thrilled that so many people are really taking a look at this. And of course, SB 1828 requires Holocaust education, and there's many ways to go about it. The teachers do not have to do this alone at all. So I would say I hope to see you in a classroom someday, or I hope another descendant may see you in a classroom one day.
Well, I thank you so much again for your time and your story and for what you do by bringing this to life for students and connecting them in an engaging way with the humanness of history. And for all those listeners who are out there, you can go to the ATP Professional Learning Portal where you will see a presentation from Elizabeth going more in depth about these vetted resources that are coming directly from the state. They're organized by age, and you can continue to review them for their appropriateness and the opportunity to connect with them during Holocaust Remembrance Week or throughout the year. Thank you again, everyone, for listening, and we will see you on our next podcast.
Thanks for listening to the ATPE Podcast. For more information about becoming part of Texas's largest community of educators, please visit atpe.org.